Hello.
Robert shouldn't have yelled.
Hello, welcome to this afternoon's session. We are going to be talking about the intersection of water and energy here. The panel title is Building a Renewable California. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I'll start off with questions, and we'll have a nice, lively discussion here. And then I'll open up to the audience for Q&A with about 10 minutes left, so you guys can also ask questions. So I guess I can start all the way over here to my far right is Brad Heaver. He's the Policy Director of the California Solar Energy Industries Association. Next to me, to my right, is Caroline Choi. She's Senior Vice President, Regulatory Affairs of Southern California Edison. To my left, immediate left, is Wade Crowfoot, CEO of the Water Foundation. To Wade's left is Maureen Stapleton. She's the General Manager of the San Diego County Water Authority. And to Maureen's left is Robert Green. He is an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times. So welcome, and thank you, all of you. So the first question I wanted to throw out there, and maybe Wade, you could start out talking about how has the drought highlighted the connection between water and energy in the state?
Yeah, absolutely. So as most people in the room know, water and energy are intimately connected. And a lot of leaders in the policy circle talk about the water-energy nexus or connection. And I would describe it as such. Water is used to make energy, obviously, hydroelectric energy. So in California, we have over 280 hydroelectric dams where water flows through a turbine in a dam and generates electricity. And a normal year, hydroelectric power generates about 15% of California's energy supply. In the depths of this drought, that number has been reduced to as low as 5% of California's energy portfolio. Now, that hasn't threatened blackouts or brownouts across the state because that is a fairly small number, but it has had some level of rate impacts in specific areas. Not necessarily rate shocks, but rate impacts. So that's one piece of the water-energy nexus. At the same time, energy is used to move water, right? 90% of the water that falls in the state falls in about 40% of the state. Or the rule of thumb is about 2/3 of the water falls in the form of rain and snow in the north, but 2/3 of the need is in the south. So you have a lot of conveyance to move the water from where it falls to where it's needed, both across the state and then once you get to a community. And so in a key fact, and one to keep in mind, is that 20% of California's energy is spent moving water in a given year. 20%, 1/5. So as a consequence of the drought and the mandatory water conservation that the governor directed, there was significantly less energy used to move water, right? And in Californians, 38 million Californians over a 15-month period reduced their water usage by a quarter, 25%. Less water use means less energy use, which was really kind of an interesting silver lining of the drought, is that it reduced the amount of energy that was being used, which is in many ways beneficial towards energy conservation goals. So this showed some sort of consequences of the drought on energy that we can unpack here.
So it sounds like what you're saying basically is energy conservation, or I'm sorry, water conservation can lead to energy conservation. And I was wondering how that sort of plays out in terms of policy and how the state looks at regulating both energy and water.
Well, I'll take this and then maybe pass it on. Really, to date, they've been siloed. You have energy regulation through the California Public Utilities Commission, and then you have water regulation through the State Water Board, the Regional Water Quality Control Boards. But I think that there's a growing recognition, as you say, that if you can actually associate the two programs or the two efforts. By saving water, you can save energy. And so typically, maybe you can answer this, that in traditional energy efficiency programs that are being administered by the CPUC through investor-owned utilities, there hasn't been a focus on water conservation. But increasingly, there's the recognition that by saving water, you can actually achieve some of those energy goals.
Is that changing, Caroline?
It definitely is changing, and certainly we have water conservation programs like with our agricultural customers, so more efficient pumping. We recognize if you can do more efficient pumping, you can save energy, and that saves money for our customers. Also, some of our low-income programs where we go in and look at a whole house programs where it's not just energy efficiency, but it's also low-flow shower heads and those types of things that help them save water as well, and that's the cost savings to the customer.
And Brad, you had mentioned also that the CPUC is looking at incentivizing conservation for both water and energy.
Yeah, trying to bring the two of them together, realizing that saving water saves energy, and so being able to combine the incentive programs for water efficiency and energy efficiency, the state has created a tool to measure both the water-saving impact and the energy-saving impact of different efficiency measures, so the two sides can come together and help fund good efficiency projects. That's one thing. Another thing is the state the utilities have this smart meter infrastructure around the state where very good quality electric usage data from individual customers is now in the hands of the utilities. We can study that and figure out how to better conserve and coordinate our electricity consumption. And the same is not true of water. And there's some efforts to piggyback on the electric metering infrastructure to transmit the water usage information so that we can get better data and improve our efforts at conserving water.
And then even, I think, in the sort of the movement of water and the treatment of water, as we think about how energy is generated today and the movement of energy and electricity in particular today, taking advantage of the time periods of when it's lower cost energy to be doing the treating and doing the movement of water. And so I think that's also another opportunity that we have.
So I think what you're referring to is now in California, often during the day we see a lot of solar energy produced, and that has depressed energy prices during the day, where electricity prices can go very low, in fact negative. And there's been some talk of trying to somehow harness that energy to move water in a way that's more cost effective.
Right. In San Diego, for example, we know that there is excess solar generation during the day, the duck curve, and that what we have is basically a pump storage program that water can actually store energy. And what we do is we take that renewable, we utilize our pumps, move water from one reservoir up to another, and then during the shoulder periods, we drop that water, creating energy, basically. So what we're able to do is actually have an impact on the curve, which means that we can, in some respects, store renewable energy. And that is a huge advancement, I believe. There's been pump storage around for generations, but I think that in this new renewable energy environment, I think there's some opportunities which we are just starting to implement and explore. San Diego region has, we're doing a study on up to a 500 megawatt pump storage program or energy storage program at our newest reservoir and the additional capacity that we've created.
And has that program, has what you're describing, have you been able to reduce costs at the agency as a result of that, or what impacted the agency?
Yeah, what we've done is actually we've entered into an agreement with our IOU, San Diego Gas and Electric, to really sell that power and do a cooperative with them. So it's been a win-win situation, and we hope that we can continue to identify those areas where water can be helpful in basically balancing the renewables to the demand.
And another potential, I think, energy storage, not just pump storage, but ice. So the utilities do have a storage mandate, energy storage mandate, to acquire a certain amount of storage by 2020. And a couple of our contracts are around ice. So it's to create ice, again, during these periods of time when we have a lot of solar in the middle of the day, so lower cost energy, create ice, and then you can use that for chilling to save money off of your air conditioning.
Yeah, there's a company that's a member of CalCia that would rubberize a room in this hotel, fill it with water, freeze it overnight, and then in the middle of the hot day, you blow the air off of there to cool the whole hotel, and your air conditioning is right there. The energy that you used for that was drawn at night when there's an excess, and you don't have to draw any energy to cool the building during the day.
And how cost effective is pump storage and these other technologies? Is it significantly more expensive than, let's say, operating a peaker plant natural gas facility?
I mean, we don't compare storage costs to peaker costs, so we're acquiring storage, and so it's separately from our peaking.
Right, I think it can play a role. It is not the sole solution.
Yeah.
And so I think as a result is it offers not only an instantaneous energy creator, because you can turn on the turbines and drop that water within 5 minutes, but also it's the duration of that storage. How long can that storage be? Is it a 2-hour storage, a 4-hour storage, or in some cases an 8-hour storage of energy needed? And that's critically important. I think what's so interesting is when we built our first pump storage project over 10 years ago, the concept was that we were going to pump the water up in the evening and drop it during the day. And in less than a decade, that whole scenario has turned on its head. Yeah. And we now pump during the day when there is cheap energy, and we drop it in the shoulder period, that 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. We drop it in the shoulder when the need is there.
I think there's one important element to add to this, and it's something that we at the Times have to deal with a lot in speaking to our readers, who are also ratepayers and voters. That they basically have the question. They say, well, now let me get this straight. So we're in a drought. We're using less water. We're transporting less water. We're using less energy to transport water. Why are our rates not going down? In fact, why are our rates instead going up? And in Los Angeles, it's a special challenge because we have a municipally owned utility that does both water and power. And so they add, well, now wait. So you own the transmission lines, you own the generation, you own the water, and yet you're telling us when we're using less of this, our rates have to go up. It is a very difficult question to answer to the satisfaction of ratepayers who have to endure less of everything. One of the things that we write about a lot is that, I know we've talked about this being maybe the 5th year of a drought in California, or perhaps, depending on how you measure it, the 6th year. We've written that this is actually the 8th year of a drought, except for one unusual wet winter in 2011. I think a case also can be made that we're not in a drought at all, that we have reverted to the normal for California after an unusual period of time during which, as it happens, this is when we came and settled and built in expectation of this continuing flow of water. So we have to explain, I think utilities have to explain, government has to explain to readers, voters, ratepayers, why it is that you're going to continually be able to use less and continually have to pay more. It's not a question to which you can ever give anyone an answer that they will be happy with.
Well, I know in the utility industry, what's happened in California, and Caroline, you can correct me if I'm, what happened in California is the amount you pay for each unit of electricity has gone up over time, but people's bills have gone down generally or stayed flat, and that is because of conservation efforts. Is that something that we could see maybe happen in the water industry, or?
I don't think so, and I think there is an explanation for why your water bills go up. And in our region, we always talk about really, you're being provided a service. Don't think of it as in gallons of water that you use. You're being provided 24/7 access to clean and reliable water. And you heard this morning in the opening session, they were talking about Sri Lanka and that they get water 2 hours a day. And that 2 hours a day costs less to provide than 24/7. And we always compare it to cable TV. You pay your cable TV bill every month, And if you watch an hour of TV that month, you pay the same cable bill as if you watched 100 hours of TV that month. That's because you're being provided a service. And we really need to change the thinking about water provision in our region to our homes and our businesses. You know, it's the old Ben Franklin saying, you know the worth of water when your well runs dry. And that is absolutely true. Our communities have said, we want reliable water.
So, but the way customers are now billed is generally through, they're billed through how much water they use. In other words, if you use a lot of water, you pay a high bill. If you use less, your bill is lower. Is that correct?
More and more retail agencies are actually having more of their costs put on what's called base service, a basic service that is provided. I know Los Angeles does not do that, but certainly in our region, in San Diego, you pay whether you use no water that month or a lot of water that month because the entity is providing that infrastructure and that operation to allow you to turn on your tap.
And I think pricing design, I mean, just is going to have to evolve. It's happening in electricity. I think it's happening in water. And it is an educational effort, Robert. I think you're right. Customers are used to paying a certain way. They're used to paying today on volume for water and on electricity. So it is a massive education campaign to educate them about the infrastructure that's providing the services that they rely on for that 24/7 access to whether that's electricity or water, and then how the pricing probably needs to shift to reflect that and the changes that are happening in the technology.
The flip side of that may be the usefulness in tiered pricing in encouraging conservation. So if you want to encourage your ratepayers to use as little water as possible, you have a tiered pricing system, which means you're not paying the same amount per unit all up and down regardless of how much you pay, that once you move to a higher tier, you're paying more per unit, and then depending upon how many tiers you have, you go higher and higher and higher. And if you've followed water pricing in California and you follow the courts, you know that that structure has been challenged under the grounds of Prop 218, one of our many ballot measures from some years back, where water users and ratepayers in the community of San Juan Capistrano challenged the tiered pricing and said, look, you're providing us a service under this ballot measure that we adopted in the 1990s. We should pay only for the cost of delivery of that service. The difficulty then becomes, how do you use pricing in order to encourage conservation? And there's a lot of kind of jockeying now, I think, among utilities to figure out the degree to which they want to go one way, the other, or can craft something sort of in between.
Yeah, electricity is kind of moving in both directions at once. And on one side, we may be seeing gradually increasing fixed charges for both residential and commercial customers so that they pay a base amount that's higher than they've been paying in the past. And also with the residential rate tiers, it used to be the large users would pay much higher rates than small users. And the Utilities Commission has leveled that out, so that price signal is not as strong. It's flattening out those rates. But at the same time, there's a strong interest in moving towards time of day pricing, where you pay a different amount at different times of day. And it's already the case for all commercial and agricultural customers, and there's a lot of interest in getting more residential customers on time of use rate plans. And then the question is, how strong can you make those price signals without bills being too volatile? And at what time do you send the price signals? It used to be that we wanted people to use less electricity in the daytime, and now that's changed, and there's one reason for that. It's because of solar, and mostly the large utility scale solar that has been built in the past 5 to 10 years in California, and that will be built in the next 10 years. It's going to completely change the pattern of electricity availability on the grid. And so now it's opposite, where we are starting to think about ways to encourage certain customers to use more power during the middle of the day. To me, that is, it's crazy. We always used to do the opposite. Now it's that. So one of the proposals that is before the commission now is what's called matinee pricing. Just as movie theaters would price tickets low to fill up their theaters when they were otherwise empty, utilities could do very cheap rates to use electricity when they have more than enough of it. So imagine if in the spring months, when the days are getting longer, so you have more solar generation, but it's not yet hot, so you don't have as much electricity consumption. In the middle of the day, in March, April, and May, you have more power than you need because of all the solar. And so perhaps you make electricity extremely cheap from 9 a.m. till 1 p.m., and especially, I would say, for large water consumers would be ideal. And already you see water agencies, as well as farmers. One impact of the drought has been farmers drilling deeper wells to get to the water. That takes a lot of electricity to pump that up. They're turning to solar. Solar's been booming in the ag belt in California for that very reason. It's very much related to the drought. So if we can target those users, especially high water users, to adjust the time of day when they're using power to move water, that would be a win-win.
That's interesting. Wade, Maureen, is there a way that you could do time of use pricing in the water?
Well, I'll share a couple thoughts about pricing. One, I think I agree with everyone here that we can create effective pricing structures that keep the agencies that provide the water in the black, that provide conservation pricing that actually drives down usage and promotes conservation. But as Robert says, it may require some reform of our law, Prop 218, and so that there's increasing discussion on that in Sacramento. I'll say that innovation in pricing in the electricity sector is a hot topic, and the ability to innovate either on pricing or technology is a little different between energy and water, because energy is much more centralized. In California, almost 3/4 of our residents get their energy from 3 investor-owned utilities, and the rest largely get their energy from 2 very large municipal utilities, one in LA, one in Sacramento. So when you're talking about innovating pricing structures, there's a pretty centralized conversation at the California Public Utility Commission with the investor-owned utilities. In the water space, you have 3,000 water agencies that are providing water to Californians. About 85% of Californians get their water from 400 big water agencies, and the other 15% from over 2,500 water agencies. So I do think that there are ways to innovate pricing. I'll let Maureen tackle the time of day question, but to the extent that there are effective, innovative models of pricing, the challenge will be to diffuse those models across literally thousands of water agencies.
I think related to time of use, actually it's the water agencies that basically do the time of use. And that is, it's when we move water and when we treat water. And in actuality, we do look for the cheap periods of energy to move water, to treat water, and then we can supply it. That's the advantage. See, water can be stored, and energy, it's very difficult and expensive.
What about a customer and the time of use that they use water? Would there be a model to price water that way?
There is not, because you would be doing it with water. It's not really a time of use unless you have constraints within your physical system, your operating system, which through conservation, we do not have that limitation. So what you're looking for is the savings of time of use for the energy used to deliver that water, basically to the agency. And that's why you see storage tanks, reservoirs, and clear water wells for treated water.
I had a question about your an increasing fixed charge for your water or electricity service. One of the criticisms I've heard of that sort of model is that, from conservationists, is that if you just pay a flat price for electricity or water every month, where is the incentive to conserve? Why couldn't I just use as much electricity as I wanted every month? I was curious if the panelists had thoughts on that.
Well, when we think about a fixed charge for covering fixed costs, it is not to cover the whole bill, right? So it is still intended to cover a portion of the costs for the utility, but to have a cost for the energy that's consumed. So for customers who adopt solar, rooftop solar, for instance, they would pay less because they're generating a fair amount of energy that they need for their home or business by themselves. Others who are reliant on the utility for providing that energy might pay more because they're consuming more from the grid. So there's still an intent to have conservation. The commission, as Brad mentioned, they are reducing the number of tiers, but it's going from a 4-tier system to a 2-tier system. So it's still intended to promote conservation among electricity users. One of the things that the 4-tier rate structure we found during our research was that some of the large, well, I should say two tiers with the, what's the large, extra large user?
Super energy
user, yeah. But what we found with the 4 tiers is that sometimes some of our lower income customers that were living in places like the high desert where their bills are really high, they were just using a lot of electricity for heating or cooling, were paying these really high bills because they were in the fourth tier. Whereas some of our wealthier customers living in Malibu or some of these other areas where their bills were low, but they could afford more, but they were just using less because they just didn't have the heating and cooling needs of some of our other customers. So the 4-tier system ended up being disproportionately impactful for some of our customers. A third of our customers are actually on an income qualified rate. So we recognize that what they pay is really important, and we're very sensitive to that. So we support going to the 2-tier structure, still having that conservation signal, but making it easier for customers to pay less.
And Mark, as you're probably aware, the solar industry is no fan of fixed charges, right? We like to give customers tools to reduce their costs, right? And if we can erase the entire bill, that's a good thing. And we historically have done that for a lot of customers. We recognize that utilities have a lot of infrastructure to pay for, and they need to remain whole. So as long as it's very gradual, we've started a minimum bill for residential solar customers that they've started paying since a year ago. And it's likely there'll be some small fixed charge. If it's $5 or $7 starting out, then that's tolerable and understandable. But for the most part, we love to have strong price signals that we can react to, that customers can be an active part of the energy system.
Another question I had is there are now increasingly a number of technologies available on the electricity side and the water side that either on the electricity side help allow customers to generate their own power or use power a lot more efficiently. On the water side, there's technologies coming in that are allowing customers to use water a lot more efficiently on site. How does that impact the way, the way we pay for our water grid and our electricity grid? And how do you see balancing out that customer demand for power production or conservation or water conservation with the need to have the customer pay for the whole system?
Well, I think the drought was a great example of the fact that there's a lot of water to be saved. In other words, there's a lot of water waste that can be permanently retired. And I think a lot of agencies, including the water wholesaler of this region, Metropolitan, got very ambitious about enabling technologies or practices for their customers to reduce their water use. The most popular or widely noted is the turf replacement program, where you actually are providing a subsidy for folks to remove the Kentucky bluegrass on their lawn and replace it with something else. And I think that's a really good example of that technology or sort of off-the-shelf technologies around low flow, aerators, et cetera, or drip irrigation. I mean, none of these are the sexiest new technologies, but when applied by customers, they significantly reduce the demand. And if you're a water agency, and Maureen can explain this better than I can, a lot of your cost is finding that last 20% of water, particularly in a place where you don't have natural water supplies. So if you can actually reduce the demand of your customers in a planned way, that may reduce your capital investment to try to bring additional water in.
Is that the case?
Right. I think there's 3 ways you can conserve. One is in response to an event like the drought. And you call on customers to do extraordinary measures that are, in some cases, I do believe harmful, have unintended consequences. I know the turf replacement program conceptually is a good idea. What has happened, however, is the first wave of turf replacement was artificial turf. And there were a lot of environmental issues regarding it because it has to be replaced every 7 to 10 years, meaning you have thousands and thousands of square feet of plastic turf going into your landfills. The second thing is the urban heat buildup, where they're putting in a lot of gravel or cement. And what we've seen is a degradation of some of our neighborhoods, particularly the low-income neighborhoods, where the landscape is an important element of keeping that neighborhood feel, as opposed to cementing your front yard and then parking 3 cars on it. And that really, there's been some devaluation of property values as a result of what's been happening. So you have the drought response. I think the second one is the fixtures. And we have cooperative programs with our IOU at San Diego Gas and Electric, where we do, you know, the dishwashers, the clothes washers, and anything that saves energy can save water. And then the third one, and the most difficult, is behavior modifications. And I was just talking to a gentleman about, you know, it's literally from the simple things of turning the water off when you're brushing your teeth to, you know, nobody sees anymore a hose, you know, running without having a nozzle attached. And I kind of compare that to, you know, decades ago they had, you know, the Don't Litter campaigns. And you know, when was the last time you saw somebody throw something out of a car window? I cannot remember the last time. And I also can't remember the last time I saw a hose running and water going down the street as a result. Behavior modifications are the most difficult, but in the end, they give you the most benefit. In San Diego, we've reduced our water use by 40% and have added 800,000 people. We use less water today in our region than we did in 1990. Now, that didn't come easy, and it didn't come in 1 year, and it didn't come because of one executive order. What it came, it's day in, day out engagement with our public, our businesses, you know, our military, to really move to water use efficiency.
Is there a risk, though, as customers are encouraged to conserve more and more, that the water utility has trouble collecting the revenue it needs to pay for its fixed infrastructure costs?
Yeah, you have to be really smart about how you do it. We have rate stabilization funds where in drought years, and we're severely reducing our water use, we're pulling money from rate stabilization funds, so we don't have this up and down of our rates. That's ridiculous. You have to really be thoughtful about how you implement your rate structures. And I don't think it's one or the other is perfect. It really is a combination of some base service costs, as well as all of our retail agencies have tiered water rates. And that is, you can encourage conservation, but at the same time, in working with your ratepayers, you can help them understand that what they're getting for their money. I guess that's it. I'm willing to pay as a ratepayer if I know what I'm getting for my money.
And it is a huge education effort. I'm sure your readers, you recognize that, Robert, and we do that with our customers. There's a lot of time spent, as you just said, in terms of making sure that you're repeating the message and trying to break through. When we look at our customers, the average customer thinks of electricity about 7 minutes a year. So trying to break through is pretty hard. And
when their power goes out.
Yeah, generally when their power's not working, right? So, or when they look at their bill maybe and think it's too high. So you're trying to explain what it is, the value that they're getting, and particularly as we see customers adopting more and more technologies that you just talked about. I mean, whether that's rooftop solar or energy storage or plug-in electric vehicles or just any of the plethora of technologies today that can help them shift their usage, whether that's a smart thermostat or an air conditioner that's controllable or those types of things. We have customers that want ease of use, and they want to be able to integrate into our system without any problems, and just being able to buy technology and plug it in. So this whole idea of the plug-and-play grid. And part of that is then for us to have the technology wherewithal, the investments that we have to make that happen. And we went from about 30 days to integrate a solar panel from a customer to 1.2 days. And that was because we were hearing from our customers that, hey, it's taking way too long. I bought this solar panel, it's sitting on my roof, and you're not letting me connect to your system and save money right away. So we know that we have work to do on our side to build the capabilities, the skill sets of our employees, but also to have the technologies to have that visibility. So the grid is still there. It connects to every home and business. It's the one thing that really is ubiquitous. Sometimes we compare ourselves to maybe the road structure, so you have the highways to local roads to driveways. You have that with the electrical grid as well, so the big transmission towers to the distribution towers to the wire that goes to a home and business. And we have to modernize that grid to be ready for all the technologies that our customers are adopting and making it easy for them to do so.
And Brad, you mentioned that one of the selling points of solar is to the customer is that they can reduce their bills significantly. How do you weigh that with the utilities' desire to be able to collect enough revenue to pay for the grid that the solar systems are connecting to?
Well, you've got to match the two. And the biggest challenge there is when people use less electricity, that enables the utility to build less infrastructure. The wires don't need to be as thick. The transformers don't need to be as big. So that reduces their costs. And then, but the challenge for the utility is predicting that, forecasting what their electricity needs will be, and building the right amount of infrastructure. It's not an easy task. But with the smart meter data that we now have, and a lot of technical innovations and advances at the utilities, they are better able to do this type of analysis. And there's a lot of discussion about the avoided costs to utilities when people go solar or use less electricity, and making those line up is the big challenge.
So I'm going to take a little issue with what Brad had to say, because I do think there are opportunities there for the utility to save money and for distributed resources like rooftop solar to help companies like Southern California Edison. But we also have to be prepared for situations when those resources are not available. And so customers want electricity, and they don't want to hear that, well, you put on a rooftop solar system and it's not working, and so we can't provide you the power that you need. So we always have to be prepared to be that resource for customers, regardless of the technology that they have selected and use maybe 90% of the time, maybe 99% of the time. But the system has to be there 100% of the time for the situations when people want and need power.
And this is the debate we have endlessly.
I know.
Maybe we should table this.
We're not going to agree today.
But there is a tension there between customers wanting to conserve and wanting to generate their own power, wanting to conserve water, and the need of the utility to be able to have the funds.
So don't get me wrong, because we certainly are encouraging our customers. For customers who are adopting rooftop solar, we're getting about 5,000 applications a month from customers to connect to our system, and we're trying to process those as rapidly as possible. So we recognize customers are choosing technologies, and we are not trying to stand in the way of the choices that they're making. We're trying to ease that integration. But that does come at a cost. You have to have the technology, you have to have the data, you have to have the communication devices to be able to integrate those more seamlessly. And as more and more customers adopt these technologies, to be able to optimize those across the system so that all customers can still depend on that reliable distribution system. And so that's where I think there's sometimes a disagreement on those things, but we certainly want our customers to adopt the technologies that they are seeking, whether that is a solar system or a plug-in vehicle. We just want to be able to accommodate those needs, and that sometimes does take an investment.
This is where I think there's an enormous opportunity. I mean, this is a conference about innovation, and California is the innovation hub. And we just passed this state law saying that between 2020 and 2030, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. In 10 years, reducing our total statewide emissions by 40%. That's huge. Everything in the mandates to buy the utility scale solar and the projections of all the rooftops that are going to go solar, not enough. Yeah. We need to do more. And so conservation is part of that, but at this point, the best conservation will come from coordinating so that we're not all using electricity at the same time, and we're being smart about it. And so there's a telecommunications aspect to this as well. And I'm talking about the water, energy, telecommunications nexus, where you can coordinate electricity usage for many users. And one of the very exciting things is the development of the energy storage market, batteries for homes and businesses. And got a bunch of companies in California. They're all startups, and they're starting to get their products out there. they are essentially software companies. They're buying batteries from Panasonic or whatever, putting it in a box, and building a control system. And that control system learns the behavior of the building and the needs of the grid and the price signals it gets from the grid, and better manages the solar on the rooftop and the electricity it pulls from the grid and the electricity consumption of the building. We need to do way more of that, and once we do that, we figure that out in California. That does, that's expertise that we have, that we export to the whole world.
You mentioned the goal to reduce greenhouse gases. Wade, you talked about how during the worst of the drought years, we're seeing about 5% of hydroelectric production. A lot of that energy is made up by natural gas-fired power plants, which produce greenhouse gases, not as much as coal, but you're still getting greenhouse gases there. So during the drought years, I believe we did see actually an increase in greenhouse gases from our electricity system as a result of this. How can we address that issue if the state does want to cut greenhouse gases by 40% below 1990 level?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll first say that I think climate change is the real driver of innovation, both on the energy side and the water side. On the energy side, you have California basically leading the world by saying we're going to continue to grow our economy, but we're going to transition to a post-carbon energy system. And so the state has set some very ambitious goals for itself, and then the conversation that you heard today is really how to get there and how disruptive to the current system of providing energy is that pathway. I think on the water side, Robert was absolutely right, which is we are in a new normal, that we cannot go back into sort of conventional thinking whenever we have a rainy winter. Science tells us that we are having warmer winters in California. We are having a thinning snowpack that typically provides about a third of our water supply. Our soils are drier. Evaporation off reservoirs is greater. So future droughts will be longer and more harmful. So we have to use this in the water space as a total wake-up call to be far more innovative. I think to your specific question, yeah, hydroelectricity as a share of the energy supply in the state went down. But a really sort of interesting success story is because more solar energy has come online in the last 5 years than arguably the last 50 years, the greenhouse gas implication of reduced hydroelectricity and the price implication of that reduced hydroelectricity was fairly muted. I think that there was an expectation of greater price spiking and greater GHG emissions. And because we had solar to rely on, those negative impacts were muted. I think ultimately, though, the question is on if we rely less on hydroelectricity is how to ensure that there's more reliable renewable energy online. And it's solar and it's wind, but it's also battery storage and geothermal to ensure that it's not just intermittent renewable energy, but also that renewable energy you can count on 24/7. So I think it's an exciting time, but I really think that we need to keep ourselves, we need to keep the pressure on ourselves to really use this as an opportunity on the water side to ask ourselves the same fundamental questions being asked on the energy side.
Are there other innovations in the water industry that we haven't talked about here that may address some of these issues we're discussing?
I think there are some analogies. We were talking earlier about the role of the individual homeowner or the individual business owner with solar panels. What is the analogy on the water side to a solar panel? Is there one? At first glance, it's hard to figure out where that would be. But actually, I think a good argument could be made that there is, although the technology is a little bit behind. There are homeowners in Los Angeles, for example, and other places around California that are early adapters or trendsetters. This is California after all, and are experimenting with cisterns, which means that they collect water from their roof. When it's raining, instead of the sun shining on your solar panel, the water comes down. Instead of running into the storm drain and out to sea, at least in Los Angeles, we have a problem with stormwater polluting the bay. There's this wonderful resource that we want to capture. There are folks in Los Angeles now who are putting it into a cistern, and then it does become a software question. What is that cistern for? It's for recharging the groundwater, or it's for home use? If you have, this is where the question of the individual user and a sort of central net comes into focus. there's a role for the water utility working together with that property owner to say, all right, conditions are now, it's about to rain, your cistern is full, we don't want flooding. We are, from our central location with your agreement, going to be emptying your cistern into the water table now where we need it. Or our water table is low, thank you very much for collecting it, but after all, it's community water, we need that now, we're going to empty it. All kinds of questions that are going to need to be asked. Is it your water, Department of Water and Power or water utility, or is it mine because it fell on my roof? Interesting questions. There will always be a lot of tug, a lot of push and pull, but there are innovations currently in process, but a lot of room still on the water side for figuring out how to make best use of not just the water that comes down, but the water that comes out of the house too, because we're going to be seeing more recycling. And so does the property owner get some financial benefit of putting that water back into the system?
Maureen, are you seeing your customers innovate more on the water use side?
Yeah, I think there's two areas. One is the use of gray water by individual homes and businesses, and that is, I think, just starting to be dealt with. Obviously, Department of Public Health, very concerned about it, because you're hoping that the system, that children aren't drinking gray water and so forth. But I was just talking with someone about KB Homes has put into San Diego a small subdivision where they actually implemented gray water systems on each of the homes. It cost about $10,000 per home additional. And that gray water will be used for irrigation. And the advantage is that gray water is generated on a regular basis. The unfortunate part about rainwater is that it traditionally has come, the October through April, but our heat is, April through October, so that's challenging. Where San Diego as a region is heading is really, we've done recycling. We don't have groundwater, which is unfortunate. We have tablespoons of groundwater around. But what we do have is we're pursuing potable reuse, where you take the wastewater, you bring it to drinkable water standards, and then it is blended with other drinking water and moved into the home. That is our big focus right now, working with the State Water Board on regulations, science panels. I mean, a huge amount of effort. And that's where I think the focus is coming, which is throughout the world, drinking water or reuse water has been utilized, and we certainly can use it in California. And that, we talk about one water. It truly is all one water. We don't get new water on Earth. They talk about, dinosaur water. We're drinking dinosaur water. In actuality, if you've been to Las Vegas and drank something, and then you're in the LA basin or San Diego, you drink that water again 17 days later. So get used to it.
Well, and I'll just make the point, it's such a powerful point that you both make. Stormwater, the rain that falls every year in Los Angeles County, for example, is an abundant resource. But unfortunately, it runs through our sewer system and out to sea. And not only is it wasted, but it brings pollution with us that's in violation of federal law. So if you take that waste and actually treat it like it's the asset that it is through, individual cisterns, or even just greening spaces, making permeable spaces, you take a problem into a solution. 1/3 of LA County's water comes from groundwater. And if you can recharge more of that groundwater basin with stormwater, makes sense. And then on the recycled water, I heard a statistic yesterday that the Hyperion wastewater treatment system, if you were able to treat that all of the water that runs through that wastewater treatment plant and provide it in drinking water, you'd address up to 2/3 of the city of LA's water demand.
But then it's an energy cost issue as well, because the water has come downhill to Hyperion, which is at sea level. Now you need to bring it back up in order to redistribute it back into the water system.
Nobody said it would be easy.
And I think the point that Wade makes is that each community has characteristics and assets, but they are not the same. So what might work for Los Angeles won't work for San Francisco. What works in San Diego may not work for, Sacramento. And it's the uniqueness of the community's assets and characteristics in water supplies certainly and water operations that we have to be careful of.
Great. Well, we have about 10 minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, please step forward to the microphone. And now's your chance.
My name is Hani Sadat. I'm with Stratus Energy Private Equity. We are the only fund of fund impact investing private equity based out of Hong Kong. We do have many technologies that, for example, they're using solar for desalination. We have a waste company that with zero emission converted into clean energy. We do have the technologies under our platform. And the biggest problem is that how can we get it in the market and how difficult that is to partner up with the, as you said, 3 companies that are basically controlling the system. How can we implement that? Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
I can start it off at least. You know, I do think, Brad talked about this, you know, California is an innovation state, and there's a lot of innovation happening in California, including within at least the electric utility sector. So we have an advanced technology lab that we partner with national labs, we partner with the universities, we partner with companies to test technology. So we'll be happy to talk to you about looking at that. We also you know, are procuring those technologies as well. So whether that's energy storage technologies in front of the meter or behind the meter, we just signed an agreement with GE to pair storage with a couple of our gas peakers. So we're testing use cases as well as some of these technologies to find where they are best able to fit on the electric grid. And like I said, happy to talk with you after this.
I think it's, for what it's worth in the water space, I don't know if anyone in the audience has technology in water that they want to be expanding in California, but I think it's really challenging because there are so many water agencies. You have your sort of best-in-class, most sophisticated agencies. I've definitely put Maureen's authority in that category. And they're very eager and very aggressive in terms of integrating new technologies. But there are a lot of other smaller, less well-resourced, less sophisticated agencies that are much slower. So when I worked in the governor's office, a lot of folks would come to us and say, we've got the world's best idea or product. How do we get this to water retailers? And it was a tough question to answer. And I don't know how you avoid having to knock on the front door of up to 400 some odd big water agencies.
Yeah, it is one of the challenges, and I agree with Wade. There's different levels of operation and sophistication in water agencies. You know, when you have that many agencies, it's pretty remarkable. There are 10 large urban water agencies, Los Angeles being one of them as well, which serves about 2/3 of the population in California. And that really is where it needs to be kind of focused, because we've got the capacity to pursue new technology where smaller agencies do not.
Another question?
So, can you address the issue of water infrastructure? We've had some problems in Los Angeles with water mains and pipelines exploding near UCLA, and the loss of valuable water and cost of repair. How do we address kind of the infrastructure needs going forward as well as the need for supply?
So yeah, question about aging water infrastructure.
In a municipal agency where you survive on your rates, there is, as I'm sure you know, a constant push and pull between a political desire to keep the rates low, and the need to constantly replace your system. A city like Los Angeles that grew very quickly, in many respects grew all at once, has water mains dating back, many of them to about the same time, and they have reached the end of their useful life, and they are all failing at the same time. And for folks who have grown up in Los Angeles, like myself, it's a very difficult thing to be told that your city is falling apart and you have to pay for it. because you say, well, I didn't have to pay for it before because we're a young city. We haven't been paying for a program of replacement over the years. There's really no answer except that we have to replace. And to replace, we have to raise our rates. We've done it in Los Angeles, but not without a great deal of difficulty. Our water and power rates in Los Angeles are quite low, but if you ask most ratepayers, they don't really get that. They would argue that their rates are far too high because they're higher than they used to be. And how could that possibly be? So I wish I had a more interesting answer, except that we just have to keep up with the replacement regimen, and it's not cheap.
And I'll build on that. If you look at a state level, again, we have most of our rain and snow falling in one portion of the state, and most of the demand in another portion of the state. And we have 20th century infrastructure for what is a 21st century challenge. And the infrastructure was built in the middle part of the last century, and it was very good at capturing the rain and snow that was falling, as Robert points out, in the wettest century in 2,100 years. But it's not optimal anymore. And our two major river systems in California, if you don't count the Colorado on the border, are the San Joaquin and Sacramento, and they both flow into the Bay Delta. And that delta, water flows through that delta that serves 22 million Californians and a large portion of the state's agriculture. It's got a set of levees that protect that fresh water from saltwater intrusion that are very old. And frankly, it's not a secret, if there were a major earthquake on the fault running through the delta, could break the levees and disrupt supply for large portions of the state for weeks or months, which would be a calamity. And so, you see Governor Brown, and of course, the caveat being I spent the last 5 years working for him, but he's, of course, prioritized modernization of this conveyance. And whether you agree with his specific proposal, I would argue everyone should be for modernizing the very large conveyance infrastructure of the state, because while we can become more self-reliant on using recycled water, stormwater locally, ultimately a large portion of Southern California and other parts of the state rely on imported water. And while we address the local infrastructure, we have to address that larger infrastructure too.
And I think it's just coming at the same time when you look at the electrical grid. California is really has the great benefit of not getting really inclement weather that you see in the east, right? So we don't get hurricanes, we don't have tornadoes. And so we do have aging infrastructure in the electric sector as well. So we have an aggressive program to replace aging infrastructure with the latest technology. And that may just be a new pole, but it's also adding remote fault indicators and those types of things to help, again, with that situational awareness of the grid. So I think about LADWP, and so you're pairing up both a need for replacing water infrastructure with a need for replacing electric infrastructure, and it's just a double whammy, I think, for customers like that in LADWP, but we're certainly seeing that even with our customers, and again, being cognizant of how do you transition those rates into the customer, so giving them ample time to understand the rate increases that are going to occur and what is happening with those revenues.
Another question?
Aren't you just describing really an inefficient marketplace where the constraints aren't driving behavior? So other parts of the country does have water, and excessive water, even other parts of California, but yet the constraint of a lack of water, we're trying to avoid the impact of it. Is it that we just need to find ways to encourage people to live where the water is?
Well, that's a provocative question. Well, I would say this. I would answer this, that we definitely need to improve the sharing of water and create a better water market or set of markets. Right now in California, even this past winter, there were a lot of people in the northern part of the state, water rights holders, that had water that they were willing to sell to water users in the southern part of the state that wanted and that needed water. But we have a very brittle transfer market. You can't even call it a market. It requires a set of approvals from several state agencies that takes weeks, literally, to trade water. That's a transaction that takes minutes or if not seconds in Australia. That's totally innovated their water market. And then again, you have this conveyance bottleneck in the Delta. So even if there was that really flashy, real-time, efficient market, you don't have enough capacity to move water through the Delta right now to move it from where it falls to where it goes. As to moving people to the north from Southern California, I'll let Maureen answer that.
We don't want you. No.
I,
Bearing the real cost of the water at the end of the pipe? Are users at this end of the pipe bearing all the inherent cost of the rest of the pipe?
yeah, yes, absolutely. San Diego's at the end of all pipes, and we bear a very large cost. We have some of the highest water rates in the state. So yeah, I agree with Wade that we don't have a water market, and weeks to get a water market or a water transfer approval would be a miracle. It'd be a dream for me. It's usually months, and then something breaks down and you never have the movement of water. We did a long-term water transfer with Imperial Valley, and it took us over 8 years. So, you know, it doesn't move quickly at all. I think there are a lot of folks and stakeholders who do firmly believe that the population should move where the water is. And we saw quite a bit of that when we were developing the Carlsbad desal plant, which opened last December and is a joy to watch, producing 50 million gallons a day of drought-proof supply. But their concern was that if you create these desalination plants, you are just going to populate the California coast even further and open up some areas that may be viewed as pristine because they don't currently have reliable water supplies to more and more development. So there will always be that tug of war between, do you move the water, or do you create the water where the people are, or do you move the people to where the water is?
Right, and that sounds like that's going to continue to be a challenge going forward. The sign is telling me we're toward the end of our discussion here. Please thank our panelists for a very lively and informative discussion. And I'm sure if you have additional questions, they'd be happy to entertain them after our talk. But thank you very much.